It's a special pleasure to do this today for a couple of reasons. Number one, I grew up in Washington, D.C., so I'm really an inside the Beltway kind of guy. I worked on the Hill, I worked at the White House, I worked at the agencies, I worked in all the way. Like, it's tough for me to keep a job because I keep moving around the White House, the Hill. But I'm now the dean of a school that teaches journalism. And one of our great challenges for our students is to try to understand the ways in which these new technologies change very, very important aspects of our craft. And so discussions like this are hugely important. And I am delighted to say that we also have some students in our audience who are here on the summer program and internship, so I know they will benefit from this as well. We are hosting a series of programs, this is the third one, with our sister school at the University of Pennsylvania, our other expert school. We'll have another one in the fall on the coverage of the Middle East issue. So I know some of you will want to attend that. Journalism at the Annenberg School for Communication has been taught for nearly 100 years, and when it was established, it was one of the few schools in the country. And some of the country's most respected journalists are alumni of the school, including Art Buchwald, Sam Donaldson, and Susanna McPhee, just to name a few. And I'm delighted that Susanna is here in the audience today, and I'm going to ask her if she will just at least wave her hand. We also have a number of our faculty who are here in the room from the Annenberg School for Communication. I would like them to stand if they would. I see Felix in the back. Roberto, Adam Powell, again, Heidi Schulman. Thank you very much, Felix. These are the folks who work so hard to make the school as great as it is. As many of you know, we have almost 2,000 undergraduate and graduate students at the school. I also want to mention that, as all of you know, the reason why we're here is that journalism is going through such a tremendous time of turmoil, challenge, and opportunity. One of my first jobs as the dean of the Annenberg School, which has a communication side and a journalism side, was to select a leader for the journalism school. And international search, and we interviewed 100,000 candidates, spent months and months doing this, and at the end of the day, we really decided that this was the most important position in the school, the position of the week. And we were lucky enough really to select someone who said yes. And that person is in the room today, Geneva Overholzer. I would like her to stand. I think I'm now known as the dean who was lucky enough to get Geneva to come to the school, and I'm delighted to be in that position. I just want to conclude by saying that we believe this is an important topic because journalism is important, but more important than that, journalism is important for democracy. That the challenges that the media face are challenges that democracy faces. And if we don't find ways in which to capture the best that the new technology can offer in the service of journalism, in the service of democracy, then our democracy will be poorer for that failure. And it therefore gives me a special delight to introduce this panel, and I really want to thank David Westphal, who, as you know, has been the Washington editor for McClatchy and had a distinguished career at the Des Moines Register. I'm delighted to say that David will be joining us this fall as executive in residence at our school. And this was really his brainchild. He conceived it. He put together the panel. He helped bring in the audience. And so I really do want to thank David.
Thank you very much, Ernie, and thanks to the Annenberg schools at USC and Penn for bringing us here today, and welcome to you all. There are two powerful narratives at work in Washington journalism these days, and they're right out of difference. It's the best times and it's the worst. The best because Washington is at the center of one of the best political stories, and maybe the best political story that any of us have ever seen. But for much of the huge mainstream media network that's been built up here over the years, Washington is also the center of some of the digital revolution's worst carnage, cutbacks, layoffs, bureau closings, the reining in of foreign coverage that's often run out of D.C., a pullback in reporting from dozens of federal agencies that used to seem like essential and mandatory stuff here. Of course, in many respects, the economic upheaval that has come with the digital revolution here is little different from the one that's playing out in Tacoma and Cincinnati and Birmingham. But Washington carries a couple of disadvantages beyond the fact that it is arguably the capital of mainstream media. First, it's national and international, not local and hyperlocal. And that puts it on the wrong side of conventional wisdom, at least much of conventional wisdom, about where the economic underpinnings for journalism will reside in the future. Second, many of our operations here are many miles away from the heartbeat of our news organizations. Some of us used to consider it pretty cool to be 100 miles or 1,000 miles away from our bosses. But when significant change comes by the month, if not by the week, it's difficult to avoid bringing up the rear of the technology train. And bringing up the rear is not a good place to be these days. Naturally, you can't help but wonder about what all this means for democracy, and we are sometimes tempted to speak very darkly about the consequences. But then you're rocked back on your heels by the facts on the ground. The digital revolution, in truth, has been a godsend for informing Americans about the political and civic life of the country. It has opened a huge vault of information, documentation, and perspective. It's allowed citizens to talk with each other. It's given them the chance to wear our reporter's hat, to inform and correct the national discussion in rich and illuminating ways. It's yielded the ultimate in a democracy, the opportunity for a single voice armed with new information or fresh perspective to be heard. Mainstream journalists know this very well. Every time a reporter at our bureau at McClatchy has embraced the multimedia world, his or her audience has grown, often by huge multiples. And the cumulative effect for the McClatchy DC website has been a doubling of traffic in early 2008 and another 50% growth since then. That kind of audience explosion is occurring in large bureaus like ours or in one-person shops like Lynn Sweet, whom you'll hear from shortly. And that's just us hidebound mainstream journalists. There is, of course, another fast-developing world in Washington, such as Talking Points Memo, Politico, entirely or mostly digital operations that are finding new niches and models to take market share away from the old players, and nonprofits like Jon Sawyer's Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting that are becoming major players in traditional journalism. Actually, I wouldn't call what John's doing exactly traditional journalism. I was at his shop the other day, and one of his colleagues was playing a Second Life video that will accompany one of their new projects. And then John started describing his foreign reporting projects, not so much in terms of broadcast or publication, but as campaigns, where the idea is to use every resource possible, including the university classroom, to spread the reporter's findings as far and wide as possible. Well, this is quite a yeasty stew we have here, and it used to be that I could tell you pretty much what every shop in Washington was up to journalism-wise. I knew what AP did, what the news weeklies were doing, what most of the newspaper Washington bureaus were doing. We knew that Bennett did regional reporting, and Newhouse specialized in staying away from the Washington pack, and so on. Today, I can't even keep pace with the change that's going on at the Associated Press, as it chases at a very quick pace new digital markets. This morning we've got a terrific panel that's going to dive into this world. It represents a sampling of the fast-changing world of Washington journalism. The large national DC bureau, the tiniest of bureaus, the small nonprofit, the large digital powerhouse, the niche digital player. So let's get started. If there's an eye of the digital storm in Washington, Doyle McManus is at it. The longtime bureau chief for the Los Angeles Times. Doyle has helped build one of the city's journalism powerhouses. But now he's facing huge challenges as Sam Zell, the new owner, transforms. Is that the right word Doyle? Transforms the Times and other Tribune operations. I've asked Doyle to talk about what this transformation looks like to him and what the Los Angeles Times Bureau is finding most promising in the digital world. Doyle?
The topic we are looking at today officially is the digital future of Washington journalism, but you know and I know that the real question before us is this: can dinosaurs evolve? We don't know what the future is going to be. What is going on in a remarkable way across all of these institutions is an attempt by journalists who've been doing it old ways for many years, and I've been doing it for 30 years, to learn a lot of new ways of doing it. It's too much to ask any organism, dinosaur or otherwise, to know what it's going to evolve into. Having enough intelligence in the reptilian brain merely to accept and embrace and jump into the process of evolution is a pretty good start. So I'm just going to very briefly talk a little bit about what's going on at the LA Times as a potential representative of big traditional old line media and how this dinosaur is attempting to evolve. We still have a big and powerful and pretty effective bureau. We've got 28 reporters and editors who include people who are among the best in the business. But like every other newspaper, our business is in trouble. I'm not going to swing a lot of numbers around today. Jim Brady is actually much better at the numbers than I am, but I will just sling two. Our paper circulation was once daily over 1,000,001. It's now well under 1 million. It's now about 800,000. It's been under 1 million for quite a few years. In May of this year, our website collected 120 million page views and 17 million unique users. Those are not huge numbers, as Jim Brady will tell you, but it's a 50% increase year over year. 50%, importantly, on what had been a low base. The difference between 800,000 and 17 million has captured the attention of the journalists who work at the LA Times. And so, as an institution, we may be representative of those who were brought kicking and screaming into the digital present, but we're now here, and we now have begun to understand that the digital world is our friend. It has created one giant universal newsstand on which every publication, large or small, gets equal shelf space, on which the journalistic efforts of a great investigator or a great analytical journalist or a great foreign correspondent at the LA Times can get read and noticed by power brokers in Washington every bit as quickly as the work of his or her colleagues at the New York Times and the Washington Post, something we struggled against for years and years and years. But we're now right there on that newsstand with everybody else. And if we break a story, it gets around as instantly as anybody else's story. The New York Times and the Washington Post have lost a piece of their competitive advantage there. Now, we do have the local versus global problem. Interesting stat, our highest rated blog is our campaign blog, top of the ticket, which I will show you in a minute. We have found that there are 4 big drivers of traffic on our site. If you can go back to the main homepage, you'll notice that at the top it's got entertainment. That's one of them. It's got the guide, which is a consumer utility, which is another. Local is a third, but sports is another. But national politics is one of the big drivers of traffic, and so that came actually as a surprise to a lot of our leaders in LA, but we are delighted that we could use the strength we already have. Okay, now let's just walk through it. This is the LA Times homepage. Which you can get through, of course, on latimes.com. Now, here, I'm going to make it easy and give you the URLs. If you do latimes.com/DC, you'll get to our first attempt to figure out the web, a pretty paltry, sad Washington page, because we quickly learned that that's not how people come to stories on the web. So next you get to, although we did have one cool thing we stumbled across in the last election cycle, and now everybody has copied, which is the interactive electoral map, which you can get to by just putting in latimes.com electoral map. You get to fill in the votes. If you want to go down to Missouri, for example, and click on Missouri, you can then award Missouri to Obama or McCain and see what happens. If you go to the next page, you'll see the blog I mentioned, Top of the Ticket, which is rapidly catching up with WashingtonPost.com's political blog in what will end up be a battle of the titans for blog dominance, and we haven't quite figured out what we'll do after the election happens. If you go to the next tab, a new blog that we launched this week. We were finding that the Bush administration, which has been a compelling story for 8 years, has fallen way off the front page, but there's still interesting stuff there. People are still interested in George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. What are we going to do about it? Well, let's try a blog. So we're now covering the White House principally through a blog, and it gets reverse published or plain old published as stories on those rare occasions when the actions of President George W. Bush rise to the level necessary to plague our print readers with it. A couple of other, and again, a lot of this, what's our future going to be? I don't know. We are in a period of just relentless experimentation. We are taking the animal enthusiasm of our journalists who want to try it and throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks. Our foreign staff, we've got 24 foreign correspondents around the world, has done 2 such efforts. The next tab is a blog called Babylon and Beyond, which puts together a lot of efforts from all of our Middle East bureaus. The tab after that is called La Plaza, which is all of our Latin American bureaus, and one of the things we are thinking about right now quite actively into the near future is how do we pull together the strength we have in national security issues in Washington and in our foreign bureaus and turn that into something that has critical mass. The 2 blogs that are up here now, Babylon and Beyond and La Plaza, don't quite have critical mass. They are beloved by specialists in the Middle East and in Latin America, but it's a pretty small audience, and it's not breaking through in a way that is convincing our relentlessly commercial owners, and God bless them for being commercial, that this work can be monetized and is worth supporting. And that leads me to the last point, which is the elephant in the room, the problem we all know, which is how do we make these operations commercially sustainable? David referred to the current conventional wisdom among most newspaper owners that you've got to do local, local, local. What we find with the wealth of our national and foreign content, the great majority of the users are out of area. They're not in Southern California. Southern Californians are sophisticated, cosmopolitan people, and they do go to those sites, but you put up good national and foreign stuff, you're going to scoop up millions and millions of readers in New York and Topeka and Kazakhstan and everywhere else. And the question is, how do you tell advertisers, how do you convince advertisers that is an audience worth having? Our largest problem, I would submit, is probably on the business side, that we haven't figured out how to do that the breakthrough on that side of getting to the digital world and figuring out how to sell these audiences is yet to come. Let me leave you with one last site here, which is totally off subject, but it is an illustration of how the web lets us do stuff that we couldn't do before. For years, newspapers have run, and other magazines have run those funny little ads that say things like, tall guy with red hair, saw you on the subway, call me. Here it is in video form. If you can't hear it, which you probably can't, a guy wandered into the house by accident, left in a hurry, left one sandal. The two young ladies are saying, "Cinderfella, come back, we have your sandal." That's not Washington journalism. But it's also, if you think about it, just a smart adaptation of something newspapers have done for centuries, and using the capabilities of digital to make it much more compelling and much more interesting. And so the good news here is that the animal spirits of journalists are alive and well, and have crossed over the conceptual river to realize that we have to survive in this new set of media. I would much rather be a journalist. I would much rather write for a newspaper these days than own a newspaper these days, because those problems are the ones that are going to be the toughest to crack. Thanks.
Amen to that. Thank you, Doyle. Lynn Sweet is Exhibit A for the clout a single reporter can have by jumping full body into the digital world. You can't actually see Lynn on the far end of the table, but I'm betting she's blogging down there.
Do a refresh. Okay. Yeah, I just added tonight.
You know, it helps to have as your primary hometown beat Barack Obama. But Lynn, as the Chicago Sun-Times bureau chief and lone reporter for the Sun-Times in Washington, has made a big splash with her must-read political blog. And she's widened her impact even more with her frequent appearances as a talking head on MSNBC and other cable outlets. I can tell you one of her secrets, which she might not let on, and that's that she's an incredibly hard worker. But there's more to her story. Lynn?
Mike, thank you so much for having me, and I want to just fix a typo. It takes a few seconds for this thing to channel through, so I don't want you to nail me on that. Thank you for having me. Good morning, everybody. I am here to talk about how what I thought was an easy and obvious transformation from just working on one platform to many. I have had a blog for more than 2 years. It was launched, who knew, on a day that a senator named Barack Obama had a big fight over an ethics legislation issue he was having with Senator John McCain. That was day one. But I've learned a lot about the blog business. I started from scratch, and actually everything I've learned is do it yourself. For me, search engine optimization, or SEO, has always kind of been a do-it-yourself operation. But what I've been able to do is create on the Sun-Times website one of the biggest blogs outside of an exclusion of Roger Ebert, who is a enterprise in and of itself. And outside of sports, I must say, no matter what I am, you can't compete in a city that has the Cubs, the Bulls, the Sox, and the Bears. But there are lessons. And here's lesson number one, that when you have a blog, you have to, I think, and I realized early on somehow, that a blog has to be about something. A Bears blog is about the Bears. Okay, so that means, and I also understood, I don't know how, that once when I worked for the print sometimes, I am working for a fairly defined audience. And even though we have had, my columns would be on the Sun-Times website, that is a headline I don't control, and that's one shot at a story to drive traffic. So I learned a few things, and one of the most important things in my learning curve was getting the paper to agree to me to let me have some insight into how and what I was doing and what was moving traffic. I do experiment sometimes just to see. And what I learned is that, I learned again very early on, that if you want to move traffic on the blog, being first is better than being the most complete. Because the wonderful thing about a blog is that you can add on. So if you just even scroll down to today, so I'm walking down the street, and I get on the BlackBerry, and I'm going, there was this early breakfast downstairs with Robert Gibbs, who's the Obama campaign communication chief, and Bob Bauer, his election attorney. And I knew something would be up today, so when I got an email from the campaign saying an important message from Barack, I knew what was happening. But as I was opening the attachment, I walk in, and Gibbs says, I said, what's up? We're opting out of public financing. Big deal. So, go down a little bit for the timestamp on here. So, before I went downstairs, okay, so that's in Central Time, 8:46. The breakfast started at 9. The rules of the road in the breakfast is it's not open. It's not open for live blogging. So I knew I didn't want to go in the room until I had my item up, because I got it. Obama had sent out the email. So within minutes, I put together, and links are very important. What you want to do, and what I've developed, is to be the go-to place for Barack Obama stuff. I can't be everything for everybody, but I could work my specialty. So in the primary campaign, was basically Obama-centric with a lot of Hillary Clinton, because to understand one, you had to know the other. And now, obviously, I'll have a lot of McCain. So real quick, I put together, if you could go down a little bit, I had go down, or go to the top, I'm sorry. I had my quick take. I had a quick lead. I pointed out what will be part of this story. At one time, Obama said he wanted to try and negotiate a deal. I had a quick quote from Robert Gibbs, who shows the show I talked to the guy, and this was discussed, and a link to the video for one-stop shopping. And then I have the excerpt, and then I have the whole text of what Obama said. I find that putting source documents is just very important. What a newspaper reporter is a reporter. I'm a content provider, and I say that with pride. Whether my reporting is in print, on the web, is on TV, in a podcast, radio, it just doesn't matter to me. What I could do that a blogger sitting in pajamas home in Kankakee, Illinois, or in Skokie, what I could do, or sitting in Westchester County, or a few blocks from here, is I could go out and find out things because I'm a professional reporter. That is key to, I think, creating a reason why you should come to me and not to a very informed, savvy blog about the presidential campaign, because they're using my material. So you have to also just provide a lot of stuff. I mean, maybe I go a little over the top in this, but that's why I think I've been able to get my hits. So now, what I've done when I was sitting here, you go to the very top. So we now know the story's out. Obama opted out. Now I was able to get some documentation. What exactly did he say? So I wrote this as I came in and was sitting here. The legacy of the sharp questioning of Tim Russert, who died Friday, is clear in this exchange he had in a February 27 Democratic primary, where he challenged Obama about the pledge. So now I'm putting in play what I've said is, at the point where I'm the nominee, at the point it's appropriate, I will sit down with John McCain and make sure we have a system. And the typo now is fixed. He never did. So I have more. Now, obviously, if I were to write a print story, all these elements would be part of the story. You would never, if Chuck was my editor, as he was when I was a mere student, if I said, Chuck, I'm going to give you the lead, and then I'll write another story for another place in the paper with some of the meat on the bones, you would give me an F. Okay? But you can't think like that. Let me tell you another thing I did yesterday that was a big traffic mover. You have to, I think, understand the reality of people. People kind of are interested in stuff that isn't always serious, such as Michelle Obama being on The View. I knew for me that was a live blog event. Okay, Michelle Obama is an enormously interesting personality. People are hungry for her. I also am able to, if we could go up, when I do TV, I put my hits on, because why not? It just lets my voice, and if I know something in writing, why shouldn't you be able to find out what I'm saying on the show? I'm also putting on poll reports as often as I get them. I've had a campaign that I've been successful at to open up Obama's fundraising activities, and because of that campaign for transparency that I've been carrying on, for years with candidates, he finally came through all the way, and now his fundraisers in private homes are open to a poll report. He had one at Ethel Kennedy's home last night, and now finally John McCain, who said he would not do this, did, and now he even had a fundraiser. So I think I generated 9 items. If you could just kind of scroll down, you could look at the headlines on it. Each one of these items got tons of hits. If I had just done this as one item with an update, which some bloggers do, it still would be the same headline, and it wouldn't be clear to people. Now, if you're at work doing what you shouldn't be doing, I suppose, cruising the net, if you just have something that says update, I think it's confusing to people. And sometimes when people do running live blogging, and then they have to read too much, this way with the headline, that I think I try to optimize to find, if you were Googling, think common sense, and you want to know what is Michelle Obama doing on The View, you might, that is why every headline, I try to include the words that will get captured to try and get into whatever that real algorithm is on the net that gets people. So as you see, there's just a whole string of stuff I did. Now, I did this more or less as an experiment just to see if generating a zillion different things would work. Sometimes when it's a debate and it's a very competitive blogging situation, I don't have the time to really break this down. Some of these items I did a bit after the show was over, but because it wasn't that competitive, and because it was daytime, and because I kind of figure my audience right now are people in an office who didn't watch the show or at home, I had a little more time, but I still just kept breaking it down, for my notes, and as I was watching to the show, to break it down as soon as one interesting thing happened. And I think my experiment yesterday kind of worked.
Lynn, I have a quick question for you. One thing I've been interested in is, what about your work now would allow you to do everything you're doing without your connection to the Sun-Times? It seems to me that in some ways, the fundamentals there could be there without a connection to a newspaper. What makes it different?
You want to be the sponsor of my blog, the Dave Westphal Lynn Sweet blog, if you want to sponsor that. Here's what I think the great advantage is. What you want in a political blog is credibility. If this was just the Lynn Sweet blog starting out, a few things. Would it have, for all of you who might know me, it's humbling and a blessing, but you really have a big universe of people there. So you have the credibility of being a reporter for a major newspaper. And also, I think that the way the web works, and I don't know the technical explanation, when you blog for a major newspaper, the ordering of things, you get an advantage. So if I were to do the same material and just make it Lynn's blog and put the same thing up at the same time, I don't think it would get the ranking in the blogosphere. And to sum up, I am pretty much an independent operator. What I do on this and how this developed really has been just because I kind of thought this was the coolest thing around. And I also understood that reporters should think of themselves, I think, as a bit entrepreneurial, and I'm a little disappointed when I see any resistance at all from my brothers and sisters to saying, no, we don't want to do this. When I started on this blog, I never asked for extra money, I never said, what about time? I just said, this is a new product I could add to my business. Because I look at myself out here as a one-woman Washington bureau, as I know I'm on salary, but as a consultant to the paper. to think of what could be good, what I could generate here, what's product. And I want to be able to keep my client back in Chicago happy. Well, I think developing a blog and showing that it could work and how it could work meant that I just became more valuable to the paper. And I want to get this concept across. If any of you are reporters, editors, if someone asks you to do something, just say yes. Okay, that is it. Now take a, I don't know about the questions, maybe you'll wait.
We'll get to, and
Yeah, so let me just
we will.
remember that when you do this, and to answer your question, sometimes now, where in the print world has a struggling circulation problem as everyone else, has a level playing field in the globalized world of the net. There's an international hunger for Barack Obama. I recognized that early on. I also, when I went to Africa with Obama, I shot my own video, edited it, did the rough cut. I do still pictures, though I've gotten a little behind on that. So, and when I can, I do podcasts, but I have to just, I just have to get more organized, because I'm not convinced, by the way, that podcasts get hits. So I'm globalized, a podcast has to be relentless, you have to be aware of what drives traffic, and you have to just work all the platforms available to you within a blog.
Thanks, Lynn. That's terrific. When Geneva and I first heard that our friend Jon Sawyer was talking about leaving his great perch as Washington bureau chief of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, we were a bit skeptical. Jon was spinning out this tale of how Emily Pulitzer's philanthropy could build a nonprofit center of foreign reporting and help fill the growing void of coverage and trouble spots around the world. 2.5 years and 60 foreign reporting projects later, Jon has proved the skeptics wrong. The Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting has won major journalism awards already.
One of the things that David asked me to talk about my transition, part of my transition is learning at the age of 56 how to do a PowerPoint. And Samuel Johnson said the wonder of a dog standing up on his hind legs is not that he does it well, that he does it at all. We'll see how I do it at maneuvering through these slides. We are a news center, as David said, early 2006 we started. I want to just race through some snapshots of what we're about and what our approach is, and then I hope we'll have time in the questions to talk more about some of the specifics. My transition, and I was bureau chief at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. I had done a lot of international reporting, enterprise reporting over many years, and when I came to the Pulitzer Center, I initially thought that what I'd be doing was supporting people like me, and that on staff, reporters who needed the leverage of a little travel support, and that they could use that within their organizations to continue doing the kind of work that I and many in this room had done for years, and that was under increased pressure. The first project, I had this kind of fuzzy notion that we would do half a dozen or so projects a year. They'd all be print, they'd all be associated with major regional papers, and I'd do one or two myself. It was going to be great. This is how we're going to spend out, and we're going to sort of be models of how journalism should be done, and we would give strategic bits of financing, travel help to newspapers. The first project that we did, in fact, was one that I did on Darfur, the African Union in Darfur. And I did that even before I had a place for an office here in DC. I went out to Darfur, I got the permits from Sudan, then I had this experience. I was writing it for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and this was kind of how I'd done my career. I'd go out and I'd do a field reporting, I'd do a project. But we happened to be, the people who hosted us here in Washington, the World Security Institute also produced a public television show called Foreign Exchange, at that time with Fareed Zakaria. And they said, you've got a permit from the government of Sudan to go to Darfur and to, in essence, embed yourself with the African Union. You're nuts not to have a camera person, because nobody can get a permit. Nobody's done that. Nobody's been out with the African Union. So we got, and I said, well, I don't know anything about video. I'm like Lynn. I'm just definitely learning as you go. So we got an Egyptian cameraman who had actually spent a year in Darfur and was tremendous as a translator, as a fixer, as an arranger, as well as a very gifted shooter. And he and I made this trip together. We came back, I did the piece for the Post-Dispatch. Then we put the short video, about a 6-minute piece on foreign exchange. And so we got additional coverage there, about 130 stations around the country. And then we got we had so much material from this trip that we had made that we cut a longer video, a 20-minute documentary called Our Choice 2. And with that documentary, we got the interest of the Holocaust Memorial Museum, which was very interested in Darfur. And we set up a panel discussion using the video as the frame for the discussion. We had Samantha Power, we had human rights activists at the Holocaust Museum flew in from Sudan. We had the top State Department person on Sudan. We had James Rosen from Fox News who moderated. And then we put that out on Link TV, another organization that I had not known anything about, but it's a satellite broadcast organization out of San Francisco. And they broadcast it nationally, an hour-long produced version of this thing that we had put together at the Holocaust Memorial Museum. And then something else I had not known anything about until I got into this was Internet 2, which is the commodity version of the Internet that something like 200 research universities and other institutions are part of. It's vastly underused at the moment. So there are many universities that have free access to this just for the taking. We set up with the Link TV and the Holocaust Memorial Museum 35 different locations around the country where we broadcast this event live via Internet 2 in high-resolution versions. And we had audiences anywhere from 8 to 10 at some places to, in some cities, we had 200 and 300 people. They were sitting with laptops asking questions of us on the panel and commenting on it, all for nothing. There was no expenditure for that. And then we put it on YouTube, where it's continued to have a life, and this was one of the early videos that we put on YouTube. So this was my first experience coming into this new world, and it was very enlightening, very empowering, and it changed a lot about how we went about the structure of the center. We became much more multimedia oriented, much more new media directed than we had been. We also grew like crazy. We ended up doing, this is just a snapshot of the project so far, the reach around the world. This is where we've sent reporters and placed how we place stories. Foreign exchange, which as of the beginning of this year, Dajit Dalwal is the host, and that continues as an outlet that reaches 2/3 of the American market and 7 of the top 10 markets. They have a video component every week that in focus, we've become the principal supplier of that. We've done upwards of 25 videos from all over the world to complement our print and radio projects since we started. We've now placed something over 80, I think it's probably closer to 90 at this point, 90 different newspapers, broadcast outlets, magazines, and so on have used Pulitzer Center stories. I'm going to run through quickly just some of the ideas, some of the approaches that we've taken. This was a partnership with the Palm Beach Post, and Cox, Andy Alexander, who's here, was helpful in supporting this, and that was a staff reporter. This is sort of the classic model that I went in thinking we'd be doing a lot of. We're not doing nearly enough, I think mainly as a consequence of the general disarray in the industry and the contractions and the buyouts, that there aren't that many people around who are jostling for foreign assignments. There aren't that many editors who are even thinking about it anymore. That's a problem. So we worked against this. But the Palm Beach Post was a shining exception to that. They seized on this. We did a wonderful project in Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and then we commissioned a multimedia interactive site to go with it. We did 3 pieces that were on foreign exchange, so that last November, each Sunday, the Palm Beach Post had a front page story. We had on this nationally broadcast foreign exchange platform a video that complemented that piece that we have cross-marketed all of it on the web. We've done a lot of reporting in Africa. NPR has been an outlet for, I think, 4 or 5 pieces that we've done on Morning Edition, exclusive reporting that Michael Cavanaugh did. Very good example of the power of this approach, because there really are many, many gaps in the world in terms of coverage, and it's as if every major regional paper in the country woke up sometime in the last few years and decided at the same moment, let's let the Washington Post and the LA Times and the New York Times and the AP do the world, and we're going to stop doing it. I know there are exceptions, but many, many people, and I think including many of my old newspaper, the Post-Dispatch, thought that others could do it. So back in January, we had sent Michael Cavanaugh, a radio reporter, to Eastern Congo to write about the Tutsis and the ethnic basis of the conflict, continuing conflict there. It happened that there were very important peace talks that came to an unexpectedly positive result. he was the only one there because the foreign correspondents based in Africa were diverted by the Kenya violence, by the continuing story in Darfur, by Somalia. Michael was there, the only international reporter. The UN, the top State Department people, all of the European, everybody was there. Michael was the only reporter. But because we had given him, you know, I think it was an $8,000 grant, he was able to go out there. So you heard this report on NPR, an 8-minute report from Michael. It was an exclusive report. We hope that one thing we'd like to see from NPR that we're continuing to talk about is some acknowledgement of our help. So when you hear it on NPR now, what you hear is Michael Cavanaugh reporting for NPR. And we think that this is a lesson in general. It's a discussion we're having with many different outlets. We think that we are a resource for all journalists at all organizations, and we want to partner with everybody. We're not competitive, but we can become a bigger resource if there's an acknowledgement of the role and people know about us and can help us to raise money to make more of this available. These are just several examples of partnerships where we did a Science Times piece on Agent Orange with the New York Times, and they also had a foreign exchange piece. We did something similar on Peru and the lawsuit against Occidental and Northern Peru by the Achuar people, where we had a foreign exchange piece the same weekend, so the Post was able to market the foreign exchange and vice versa. We did a series with the Seattle Post-Intelligencer and Hearst on water wars, a great project that we've done with young journalists that's done on NPR, it's on BBC The World, World Vision, San Francisco, all over the place, and including on foreign exchange. Iraq was one of our most prolonged projects last year. We had a reporter and a videographer in Iraq for 2 months plus last summer, and they went places. They embedded with the Mahdi militia, they went with Sunni militias. They did things that most of the foreign correspondents based there just were not in a position to do. They wrote and filed for a dozen plus print outlets, radio, all over the country while they were there. They did 3 videos for foreign exchange. They did David Enders, the young reporter who was the principal reporter on this. We put on foreign exchange with Fareed the day before General Petraeus testified in Congress last September. And David was sort of challenging, very much challenging the conventional wisdom at the time. And we exposed that, you know, let him get his point of view across with Fareed. And then the videos that they had done, the documentaries were a full hour on Democracy Now!, Al Jazeera English broadcasting. We then took it out to schools, which is another part of what Pulitzer is doing, educational outreach. We took David to St. Louis to 8 schools. We were a part of a pilot program we're doing there to bring journalism to class, to try to engage students and reach people who are not paying attention to traditional media. We filmed that. We hired a videographer in St. Louis to do the exchange, and then we put the students' voices, youth voices on Iraq, we put on foreign exchange. So this is what David was talking about earlier, this idea of a campaign. This project was producing material in all outlets over a period of 3 months. And finally, we put one of the videos up on YouTube, and this was our biggest success on YouTube, and a testament to the potential for YouTube. This was a very serious piece of what was going on in Annenberg province, and we had 250,000 hits in the first 5 days, and it continues on the channel. This is an example of an investigative project. We sent Loretta Tufani, who had won a Pulitzer Prize at the Washington Post back in the 80s. She was a China correspondent for the LA Times. She then wanted to set up a business in China, furniture import, based on her 5 years living there. She spent 3 years, made 25 trips, got deeper and deeper into the factory conditions in China, decided she didn't have the stomach for that because she was appalled by the conditions she was finding. In about 2003, 2004, she decided what she really wanted to do was go back to journalism and expose that. And then for 2 years, she's a very well-connected investigative journalist, knows most of the people, lots of senior editors. She went from paper to paper. She went to the LA Times. John Carroll wanted to run it. John Carroll then left the paper. And in the disarray that followed, the LA Times lost interest in it. The Philadelphia Inquirer at one point was going to do it. They then lost interest as they were sold and new editors came in. Newsday was prepared to take her on as a special correspondent. And then the Tribune shut down all of Newsday's foreign bureaus and said they weren't going to do any of that anymore. So when she came to us in 2005, she felt she exhausted all the places that anybody would support this, and we ended up giving her $14,000, which Loretta will tell you is a very small amount of money, but it was a large amount of money for us at the time, and funded 4 trips to China over a 12-month period. She made another trip that was funded by the Center for Investigative Journalism the next summer, but for 12 months of this 14-month project, we had no outlet for this series. We didn't know where it was going to go. And we used to sort of joke about it in our office that this was our lost leader, that month after month we'd report to Geneva and others on our advisory council and our trustees that this thing was still pending, we weren't sure where it was going to go. Loretta had moved out to Utah, and literally at the 13th month, we showed it. She and I met with the Tribune editors, and they said, this is a hell of a series. And they said they saw what was in it, sort of exposing and naming the names of U.S. companies that had been involved in these factories, making for the consumer market in America lots of safety and health problems. So the series ran, and then she was on NewsHour. We had her for an hour with Ryan Lamb on C-SPAN. There was a Senate Commerce Committee hearing on it. And then they just showered with prizes this spring. It was the gold medal winner for the RE. It was the SDJ Best Investigative Project, won the Michael Kelly $25,000 award, and was the finalist at Harvard. So she actually ended up making some income. This is another story that we can get into about, how do you support journalists, but not everybody can win enough prizes to actually try to live on.
It's really a remarkable story, John, and John was talking the other day about the fact that the Pulitzer Center might be near the top 10 in terms of providers of content in the United States for foreign news, which is kind of remarkable when you think about it's a 2.5-year-old nonprofit. Thanks so much, John, for that terrific report. I remember talking with executives at the Washington Post in the midst of the .com collapse, and asking them whether they still believe their investment in WashingtonPost.com was going to pay off, given all the internet carnage around. And they said, "Oh yes, it's going to come back bigger than ever." And of course, so it has. And so has the Post's early vision, carried out so ably now by Jim Brady, executive editor of the award-winning WashingtonPost.com. I've asked Jim to talk about the site and about the economics of WashingtonPost.com's 2 markets, the local and national, and also to help us think a bit about the digital tools that his shop is finding are most effective in telling Washington's story. Jim?
Morning. Answer Doyle's question about can dinosaurs evolve. And certainly that's been a lot of what my job involves, just trying to get people who have not grown up in the digital era to acknowledge and take advantage of all the opportunities the web provides. And I think for the most part, we are evolving, maybe not as quickly as people outside of the business tell us we should, but I think we're evolving relatively well. There are some who won't evolve. At every time I speak anywhere, there's always somebody who asks the question of, or suggests that web can't possibly take over because you can't take a laptop into a bathroom. Which I always feel like if that's our last best defense, that you can't take it into the bathroom, that's not a particularly good defense. And by the way, have you heard of the BlackBerry? But for the most part, people do get it. And I think the battle that we fought at the Post for a long time, because I was at the site way back in the early days and then came back 4 years ago, was trying to convince people at the paper that the natural resource that we should be trying to preserve is the journalism, not the newspaper itself. And I think that was a long, tough battle because people at the paper are very wedded to the newspaper. And I think at the web, we view the web as having such great opportunities for journalism, and that's what we really are trying to focus on. And I think for the most part, people understand that is where we have to go. In terms of the history of the site, there's really 2 key elements to it. One, the reason I think we threw so much into it early and continued to invest in it even during the .com disaster of 2000. One was Don Graham, who back in 1994 was telling everybody that this is where everything was headed long before most people understood exactly what we were getting ourselves into. But secondly, I think we were, like the LA Times, in an advantageous position with the web because it gave us the national and international distribution that we could have always desired but couldn't really make a business model work for in print. So unlike the New York Times, USA Today, or the Wall Street Journal, and those 3 newspapers specifically, any place in the United States that you could fire up their websites, you could buy the newspaper. So in our scenario, outside the Washington area, it was all gravy for us because you couldn't buy the paper outside the Washington region, so being able to go to the web was just an add-on for us. So we have been pretty aggressive at it for a while now, but we've always suffered from this schizophrenia, this local national dilemma, as we call it, which is that if you put 2 people in a room and ask one to argue why we should focus the website nationally, and you put somebody else in the room and ask them why we should focus locally, they would talk for hours and you would be convinced that they're both right. Because if you look at, right now, 85% of the people who come to WashingtonPost.com are outside Washington. However, the 15% that are local drive 40% of our page views, and by the way, 2/3 of our revenue because of classifieds. Reversing it the other direction, we already have the best penetration of any local website in the United States in its city. So the ability to really grow significantly locally is pretty limited for us. But then turn it back around again. Nationally, we have a pretty large advertising business, but when we go talk to Microsoft and Intel and these huge advertisers, we're going up against Yahoo, Google, Microsoft, huge companies with huge budgets. And so we decided 3 years ago to try to be both in a sense by going to a 2 homepage strategy, which is that if you give us a local zip code, you get a local homepage. If you give us a zip code outside Washington, you get a international homepage. So if you live in LA, you don't have to hear about our traffic problems. God knows you have enough of your own. If you live in LA, you don't need to hear about ours. You can actually change that setting, but basically that's something we decided. Instead of trying to figure out how to handle these 2 totally different audiences with 1 homepage, let's do 2. And it's been pretty successful. We still have struggled with this question because with diminishing resources, you now have to really choose where you're going to put them. And then the added complication, which is we're in Washington, D.C., where what's local is often national. So there's a real tension there. So at this point, we've continued to go after both. We've again, we have a significantly declining classifieds business, not to talk business side too much, but a little bit. So we are really still trying to grow that national business as well. So we probably will continue to focus on both. To Doyle's point, politics still drives the most traffic of anything on WashingtonPost.com, and politics traffic is largely national. Right after that is opinion content, which is often about politics and is often natural in nature. But if you then look at the next 3 or 4 things on the site that are incredibly popular, it's local sports, it's local news, so even if you start looking at where the traffic is, it's hard to say, well, this is really where people are going. They're going to both. So we've continued to kind of push that way. And so there's really, in terms of the tools and what we're trying to do, there's really 5 areas that we focus on a lot at WashingtonPost.com. I really feel like we need to keep pushing our colleagues at the paper and pushing our own staff to really get into. One is obviously multimedia, the opportunity to tell stories in all these different ways that we couldn't before in print, whether it's video and photo galleries, whether it's really strong interactive packages. We're doing a ton of that these days, specifically in politics, relating to Washington reporting. Anybody has seen Dana Milbank's videos. Dana Milbank does these sketch videos that are largely almost always hilarious. But Dana's doing his little sort of a spin-off of his book, which is the Washington culture and why you have to laugh at it or else you'll go crazy. So we're doing a lot. We've done live shows this year around some of the primary nights. We've actually tried to kind of copy the cable news, and for 4 or 5 hours we'll put Post reporters, Newsweek reporters, we'll have politicians call in and do basically a 3 or 4 hour show. Done pretty well. Still something we're working on. The second thing that we're really focusing on a lot is database journalism, and in the area of politics, this is gold. This is, it's the idea that data can tell a story too if you make it accessible and easy to navigate. So we have congressional, in fact, if you do a politics up front in the nav up there. Oh, hey. Welcome to our world.
Ulterior motive there.
That's right. You can put mine in if you'd like. I know how much people like registering. This happens in our office too. You get no breaks. So if you go down the page, well, you can see the a little farther down the page where the toolbox is. Just scroll down to your guide to. Yeah, you're actually in the right place. If you look at that guide to 08, your guide to 08, there's a sort of a toolbox there that has all sorts of ways to, again, it's the same thing Doyle was showing with the Electoral College predictions. It's being able to search campaign finance data. It's checking where the candidates are going to be, which we've mapped on Google Maps, so you can see how many times the candidates have gone to certain states, so you can try to pick up trends. And if you actually click on the issues thing there, I'll show that real quick, that issues link right below the cursor. This is actually something we did with a partner called Daylife, which is we basically look at all these different sources and find out what people are writing about the candidates on the trail, which also is somewhat of a reflection of what they're talking about, although not a total analog. So if you click on, yes, Mike Gravel is technically still in the race, but if you click on Barack Obama, down there you can actually see that the bigger the words are, the more that they're talking about these particular issues. So if you click on Iraq War, it'll pull in all the references on the web at large to Obama talking about the war. And most of these links are not on WashingtonPost.com. They're on blogs, they're on other news sites, and it does take a little while to load. That's one of its...
So there's no string for any kind of, how does your system...
It's working off of a list of about 500 sites that it only picks from those. Yeah. So it doesn't pull from everything on the web. We gave...
Sometimes on your list.
Okay, I believe it is, but we'll find out soon enough if it ever loads. So, and so we're doing our congressional voting database has every vote cast on the Hill since 1991, which is sortable by 1,000 different ways. Well, this is always bad. This is why you never do a live web demo. It does actually work, I promise. So we're doing a lot with databases, and what we found is that people really want to be able to tunnel through these large amounts of data and find stuff that's relevant to them. So in the congressional voting database, for example, if you can sign up for an RSS feed so that anytime your representative votes, you get notified. So you can much more easily track what your reps on the Hill are doing. In fact, if you go under politics real quick in the drop down there, there's a Congress votes, House Senate votes. Yeah, you just go back down to the tools area, and you'll see a congressional voting promotion. But it's a really, really neat tool that, there you can see the Congress votes database, bottom right, under Inside Washington. There you go. Go to, not below that, the House, just go to Senate. And basically you can sort this by, a variety of different ways. You can search by, you just click on full list of members. A little farther down. Sorry. And any of them are fine. So basically, you can go to these pages and find out here's Lamar Alexander, here's his biographical information, the votes he's cast, his roles in Congress, financial disclosure forms, how many votes he's missed, how often he votes with his party, and then you can sign up for that RSS feed at the bottom. So if you go a little farther down, it'll actually show all the votes. So this is something that obviously is a great tool for reporters as well as just for people who want to track their own, the activity in government. If you actually click on any of the actual votes like vote 149 or any of them, it doesn't really matter. You can see what a particular vote page looks like. So this is the vote. You go down, you can actually see the voting totals. And then if you click on Democrat or Independent or Republican, it'll fill in the who. So this way it'll.
Do you write the vote description too? Is that staff written?
And staff written on the major ones. We'll take when they're more procedural and not that. We'll basically take what we get out of the database from the House and the Senate. And you can sort it by a bunch of different ways. The developer who did it decided by astrological sign would be fun. So that little Easter egg is in there if you want to see how Virgos are voting on the war. The third thing that we're focusing a lot on is reader engagement, which is that the web provides such a great opportunity for journalists to engage with readers and for readers to engage with other readers. And we've done a lot in that space. We do live discussions, which are about 70, 80 hours a week of reporters and or newsmakers taking questions in real time from our readers, which are incredibly popular and incredibly a real loyalty driver for us. We have comments on every article, which you can often read through and find some wonderful things people have to say about the Washington Post and quite a variety of other things. But again, people who comment on articles tend to be our most loyal and most devoted readers, not necessarily the crackpots, but the ones who post every day and are really in a dialogue with us. So we really are always looking for ways to get readers involved in what it is that we're doing. We actually had most of the candidates actually on for live discussions during the primary season. I would put this in the category of blogs, because one of the great things about blogs is the comments on the blogs and the audience that you build around. As Lynn, I'm sure, can tell you, the audience you build around your blog, you probably know you know an awful lot of the commenters. They probably refer to you by your first name. They talk to you as if they've known you all their life. And so our blogs, whether it's the Fix or the Trail, which are the two biggest blogs on the site by a pretty significant margin, if you don't count White House Brief or White House Watch, which is Dan Frumkin's column, is a blog, which I don't, other people do because it's really a column. But our most popular, those two most popular blogs are both about politics, and we have 5 or 6 other campaign-related blogs that are probably in the top 20. So it's clearly a strong area for us. And again, if you're Chris Cillizza, who's on TV more than Seinfeld reruns these days, Chris is the classic sort of 21st century journalist. He was a good writer, he's a strong reporter, he goes on TV all the time, he blogs all the time, he's got a webcam mounted at his desk where if he wants to give a quick 30-second take on something that just happened, he can just push a button, give his 30-second take, send it to the video unit, and it's up on the site in 10 minutes. Then he can go sit down and write something, but if we really want to get something quick up, Chris is the guy who knows how to really get content up quickly and get his take out there, and also knows how to build a personality around himself. So reader engagement is really key because people are devoted to Chris. The other great thing about communities are on the web, which is, although we obviously think we do tremendous reporting nationally, internationally, locally, a lot of what we do other people are covering as well. So there's some commoditization of what it is that we cover. However, if you can get somebody to really be a part of a community around a subject or around a personality on your site, they can't go anywhere else to get those people, that community. They can only get that on your site. So you're unique if you can build a community that gets people to stick around, which is why we focus so hard on this and why I think it's one of the great tip-offs to a loyal reader is people who do these kinds of things. The fourth one we're really focused on is distribution, which is the Field of Dreams model of build it and they will come on your website is kind of dying. The website will still be the dominant sort of digital way that we get our journalism out for a while, but quickly people are going to their mobile phones, they're getting their content in a lot of different ways. The iPhone is clearly going to be a major disruptor of this. And so as you're producing new things, always having a strategy for how to get it on other devices from inception is really important. Don't wait 6 months and go, God, we all really ought to have this on our mobile site. Should have it on your mobile site day one, probably. And that also includes distribution, another form of it, which is you should put your content where people are. If people are spending millions of hours a day on Facebook and they're spending millions of hours a day on YouTube, then you should make sure we have made sure that the Washington Post exists on those platforms, and often with an attempt to drive people back to our site. So we have Facebook applications that drive people back to WashingtonPost.com. We're twittering campaign nights now, where we're putting basically updates to our own site through Twitter so that people, everybody here knows what Twitter is, but it's basically a device that if you don't think putting your status on Facebook is quick enough, you can basically update what you're doing on Twitter every 3 seconds all day long and tell your entire network of friends that you just got a soda. But it can be used in a lot of useful ways as well by putting out RSS feeds and other types of journalism, so we're doing a lot with that. So you really have to keep an eye on that. The fifth thing is the one that's kind of new for us. We're putting more focus on it than we had until maybe 6 months ago, is that the web is this field of grazers, as we like to call them. They go where Yahoo or Drudge or Google or somebody tells them to go, and occasionally or every day we may get 100, 200, 3,000, 100,000 people come to the website who were referred by somebody else, and that because that may be our one and only chance to turn that person into a loyal user of our site, we're trying to do a much better job of what we're calling discovery, which is if somebody lands on Chris Cillizza's blog through Google, we sure as hell better have a way to convince that person on that one page that there's a lot on this site that they ought to go look at. So we're trying to do what we call, obviously we have related links and all that. We're also trying to do strong promotions for our multimedia content so that someone who comes to it, that Cillizza thing will see that we have a video about it. Maybe if we get them the video, then we get them to something else. Maybe that third or fourth click, they say, it's a pretty good site, I should probably bookmark this and come back. And in that vein, we're not doing an Amazoning of the news on our article pages, which is people who read this also read this. So you may be reading a Redskins story, and the articles in that box may be about politics, and they may be about a local crime story. It has nothing to do with what the story's about. It's that people who like you, who are on this story, read this story. And it's actually one of the most successful areas on the article page in terms of click-through. So we're trying to focus a lot on how to get that person in the door and keep them. So those are sort of the key focuses. Really quickly, because I know we're going long here, a couple of myths about the web that I want to try to knock down. One of the things that comes up a lot is people only like short videos. Not true. We've had lots of short videos that people don't watch the entire minute because they're lost after 20 seconds. And we put Obama's race speech up, which was 35 minutes long or something in that vein, and 60% of the people who watched it watched the whole thing. If the video is good and it tells a good story, Travis Fox is probably our most renowned video journalist, has gone all over the world and often does 8 or 9 minute pieces. People watch the whole piece. If it's a good story, they get to the end. And the other video myth is that, when YouTube has lowered the bar on quality, you can, everything you put up can be complete crap, and you don't have to put high production values into anything. I think it's a mix. You want some high production value. You want something like Chris Liza recording himself for 30 seconds with a webcam. Basically, it's what's in the video that matters. The quality of it, I think, gets sometimes overplayed. It's, again, if it's information that people want or a story that people are compelled by, they will stick with it. Same thing goes for stories. There was a Pointer survey or study, iTrack study done maybe a year ago that showed people read longer into web stories than they read in print stories. And that shocked a lot of people because everybody assumes people want to read one graph on the web and then go back to YouTube or Facebook. But they actually were reading deeper onto the web. And again, if the story is good, people will read it. And I think one of the ones that a lot of organizations are still battling with, which is that readers are idiots. We hear this, we used to hear this a lot, like, I'm not going to look at the comments, these people are morons. And if you really read through your comments, there's no question there'll be some crap, there'll be some stuff you want to, you just have to grit your teeth and ignore. But often in the comments areas, there's lively discussion. Sometimes there are story tips. Sometimes people are correcting mistakes. Sometimes people are putting you in contact with someone who could become a source. And that there's a lot of information readers have that we need. And I think a lot of journalists are still not spending enough time kind of looking at that source as something that has any positive value, and I think it does. So I'm glad to answer any questions later.
Thanks, Jim. And we will be taking questions right after we hear from Brooks Jackson. Brooks has been living the life of transformation in Washington for a long time. He worked as a reporter at the Associated Press and then at the Wall Street Journal, and then jumped to CNN and cable news, where he showed how a successful print reporter could replicate that success on cable. I've asked him to bat cleanup here and give us his perspective on the evolution of Washington into the digital era. Brooks?
Thank you, David. I think it goes too far to say we're an arbiter of truth. We don't call ourselves truth check. I believe that truth to theologians and philosophers. Don't have any pretensions in that area. We figure if we can get some of the facts sorted out as reporters, we're doing okay. The history of this website, I think, illustrates to some extent what we're talking about here today. I came to the Annenberg Political Fact Check in late 2003 after leaving CNN. The job was to research a book that I was going to co-author with Kathleen Paul Jamieson, the former dean of the School of Communication, Penn. And in the meantime, fact-checked the 2004 election, put it up on the website. At that point, the Annenberg Public Policy Center had a static website that every time they had a new press release, some student would get into Dreamweaver and in about 48 hours or so be able to update it. Well, that obviously wasn't going to work, and we put together a little site that in its initial iteration was just basically articles in reverse chronological order, an About Us section, and not much more. We posted the videos of the ads that we were critiquing, but in a way that effectively hid them. Most people didn't even know they were there. The thing just astonished me. I figured when we first started off that basically this would be something that a few real political junkies would tune in on. It would be, if we were lucky, become a source for those hardworking one-person bureaus like Lynn Sweet, who are running around trying to cover every word a candidate says and having to meet those 4 a.m. baggage calls and do all that stuff, and would perhaps welcome a little help in public policy research, delving into the accuracy of what the candidates were actually saying. And we are used that way by a number of journalists. But what really astonished us was the number of just interested people who found us and started clicking in. At one point, Kathleen sort of admonished me, so I didn't hire you to start a news agency, but seems to be what we've done. By November 2000, we launched in December 2003. By November of 2004, we were regularly getting more than 200,000 unique visits a day, sometimes 300,000, depending on the interest. We had run up tens of thousands of subscribers. About all we did was to offer to email for free the articles as we posted them. And the number of people who came to us overwhelmed the meager resources we devoted to hosting this thing that we had to quickly, in the middle of the campaign, switch from the little University of Pennsylvania box that we put this thing on and go to a commercial hosting service and re-engineer the back end of this thing. It was kind of like trying to fly an airplane and change an engine at the same time without landing, covering the campaign and re-engineering the website. So over time we've added a video feature, Just the Facts, a weekly report. Very talented young lady, Amy Kalawale, on our staff came to me and said, I want to do a podcast. I said, well, I don't know that anybody wants to listen on an iPod to a report about a TV ad, which why don't we do it as a video? So she's done a very nice job with that. We've added, because we got so many people asking us questions, I was too much of a coward to allow public comments on our stories. We just post them and then we read what comes into the editor inbox. And so many people would ask us things and we responded as we could. But we started out and decided, well, let's post some of these answers, research them thoroughly enough that we could publish them, and we put up about 4 of those a week now, and it's a very popular feature. We are currently, politics is seasonal work, of course. Debunking political ads and political statements generally is something that attracts a lot more attention in an election year than in a non-election year, but we are currently getting maybe 50,000 in a typical day unique visits. Our subscriber list is 67,000 people. And so it's kind of like running a small magazine to run this website. I'm most heartened actually by, I've always said that it should be an embarrassment to mainstream media that we exist, because it seems to me that the job of evaluating the truthfulness or accuracy of what political candidates are saying, especially at the highest level, is a core responsibility under the First Amendment of anybody who is given the privilege of a free press. And I was very pessimistic when I started this. CNN, of course, had stopped doing sort of reports that I had done for them starting in the 90s, which is why I was available for employment at the time, and they ended up in Annenberg. We put on a conference recently, though, and released results of a couple of studies that we'd done. We looked at the top newspapers. I think there were 44 that had searchable, we could do full text searches going back to 1992, which was our starting point. And we did a survey of local TV news directors. And what we found was that there are actually more newspapers doing more truth squad type stories, those which we defined as stories that came to a sharp judgment about the accuracy of a TV ad or a political claim, not just the sort of paint by numbers political kind of coverage you get of ads sometimes, where there might be a section in the 5th paragraph devoted to accuracy. But what we found is that it's really on the uptick. It had fallen off from an initial fad for this sort of stuff in the 1992 campaigns. It hit a low point in 2000, but it's been coming back strongly. And as we were preparing those reports, to me, very encouraging developments took place. One, the Washington Post began a feature called The Fact Checker, bringing Michael Dobbs out of retirement. And just before that, Bill Adair, who's in the audience here, St. Pete Times bureau chief, put up PolitiFact.com in cooperation with Congressional Quarterly. Both these sites do kind of what we do in different ways. It's really fun to watch how, what innovations each of them brings. Dobbs awards 1 to 4 Pinocchios to candidates depending on the degree of mendacity. Bill has a truthometer that's a little electric meter looking graphic that can go from anywhere from true to false or even ants on fire. The meter is actually in flames. We're way too stuffy at an Ivy League university to get away with anything like that, but we keep plodding along doing what we're doing. But it's, to me, it's encouraging that at least some in the mainstream media, folks that really have the resources that we don't have, are stepping up to the plate and doing this sort of thing. And they're telling me that it's pretty popular. And Bill tells me just before we started here that his traffic is higher than it's ever been. And I think it's something I would encourage all of you to take a look at. I was asked to sort of that cleanup here. Oh, one thing I want to mention, we also have another website. One of the things we discovered was that it's called factchecked.org. After 2004, we did a user survey, and one of the surprises to me was that 10% of our folks who responded, and we got 22,000 responses. It's not a scientific sample because it's self-selected, but it was a pretty big chunk. 10% of the people who responded said they were teachers. A lot of them said they were using this stuff at in their classes. And so we began factchecked.org. Can you find it? Well, it's and this basically we try to we shoot it at about the junior, senior high school level, or at least what we think. We're not educators, so I do have now on staff a former philosophy professor who taught at West Point, of all places. Folks with some classroom experience. What we're trying to do is essentially give teachers the resources to teach high school kids how to think the way a journalist thinks and evaluate evidence and come to their own conclusions, find valid information, know how to tell accurate information from inaccurate information. Well, some overarching thoughts here, if you'll permit me. I felt when I was invited to this that I was probably more appropriate as an exhibit in a panel about the journalism's past than an expert on the future of digital journalism. Many days I've felt like a dinosaur watching mammals eat my lunch, wondering where the whole thing was going. I'm probably less pessimistic now than I was 4 years ago about the future of this digital journalism. The business aspects, I don't know. It still looks dicey to me. It still seems to me that we have created a situation in which Google, which creates no content whatsoever, basically collects all the content that journalists gather and then sells advertising. And rather than hire any reporters to creating any content, they hire more ad salesmen and 4-star chefs to give free meals to their ad salesmen. Meanwhile, the newspapers that create the content are laying off reporters in droves, and this is obviously an unsustainable situation, a trend that cannot continue. At some point you have 0 reporters, 0 content, and Google has to lay off their 4-star chefs. It doesn't help that Craig's List figured out way before any newspaper publisher that the internet was a vastly superior way putting classified advertising, the highest dollar source of revenue per line for newspapers, and basically does it pretty much for free. So that's one way a lot of advertising revenue is leaving newspapers and going to the internet and not being recycled into hiring reporters to do the kind of stuff that we do here. So I don't know, I have faith, I guess, that someday, somewhere, somehow, somebody's going to figure out how to make a buck on this. Maybe it's going to be Rupert Murdoch, I don't know, but it's going to be somebody, and they're going to get very rich when they figure it out. I am much more optimistic, and even more so now than I was an hour ago after listening to the panelists here about the craft of journalism as opposed to the business of journalism. My experience taught me that there is a hunger out there for the kind of stuff we do, and people found us. We had no budget for advertising, no budget for promotion. We were fortunate that a lot of reporters would interview me about factcheck.org, and we did get a lot of earned media, as political consultants call it that way, but without any sort of paid promotion. We built basically a small magazine on the internet. And what we're hearing here, I totally agree with Doyle McManus when he says I'd much rather write for a newspaper these days than own a newspaper. The opportunities here are just enormous. You heard Lynn Sweet say that the venue, the channel that she's communicating through doesn't matter to me. Obviously it does. She's been very, in addition to being perhaps the hardest working woman in journalism, do you sleep much?
No, absolutely. The blog never sleeps.
Well, I couldn't do it, but she's obviously figured out the different channels require somewhat different tweaks to the basic product of reporting. Jim Brady told us too, if a story is good, people will read it, and I think that's the essential thing. Journalism as a craft is it's in demand, and it's in demand. The demand is greater probably than the supply, but and as we pursue the craft, though, it is changing a bit. Doing fact check stories, when I first was asked to do them for CNN initially, I was reluctant because it was outside just a bit outside the boundaries of what I had always understood objective AP style journalism to be. I was asked to actually label a statement as true or false or misleading or not the whole story or something like that, to characterize it, something that I never would have been allowed to do or wanted to do at the Associated Press, the Wall Street Journal, or in any sort of traditional objective style of journalism. And yet, it worked somehow. And if you try to be fair and you are perceived as being fair, people will accept your judgments. I finally figured out that the standard really was, what I was doing was I figured, what are my standards going to be? When do I label this statement as misleading or false? And I concluded that if I would reprimand or fire a reporter for turning in copy like the ad I was critiquing, then I would be justified in characterizing it in some negative way. So I found I was actually applying traditional journalistic standards to political copy, and I justified what I did that way. Politicians hate that, by the way. Now, Lynn has told you that you've got to adjust. You don't have to have the whole story. Maybe you can file the lead first and add details later. Actually, that's not so new. That's the way we used to file stories on the teletype when you had a bulletin and urgent matter with the next two columns, the next two paragraphs would come, and then the rest of the story. So it's maybe a reversion
Oh, it is.
to
I wish I could have the bell ring.
yeah.
You know, you could.
Every time I filed.
You know what? You could
Say
have somebody
Twitter,
add that
say
to
Twitter.
the sound,
Remember the bells in the,
little WAV file,
Remember
yeah.
the bells in the wire?
Nobody know what
Roberto?
it was,
Remember
but
the
it
bells
said
in
you
the
and
wire?
me.
I think the personality of the person reporting inevitably is going to come through in a way that it doesn't in more anonymous AP style reporting. And you have to figure out how to deal with that. If you're a trustworthy and likable personality, or at least can con people into thinking you are, you'll do okay. And one caution I would have, you're hearing great success stories now, especially about political websites. Lynn's, the top of the ticket, where my old fraternity brother Andy Malcolm is writing and doing a wonderful job. But it's, politics is seasonal work, though, and inevitably, when this campaign is over, a lot of that audience is going to go away.
Brooks, we probably should get to questions so I can see
I'm
people
done.
checking in. Thanks so much for that great story.